Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery in these yellow buckets that you see here. Yep, those are the yellow buckets that we ran our European nightcrawlers in for a really long time. According to my records, that was 292 days to be exact, and what we did, since trying to harvest those castings out of those buckets would have been a big pain in the neck to separate the worms, those 3 buckets, their contents were relocated into this bus box over here. These are actually the same labels that were on the yellow buckets back then. And it's representing the fact that this is just a system that continues from that point forward, from when those yellow buckets were emptied into here. I still treat this as a batch of material that's now 338 days and counting, with a number of haul-outs that have already been conducted out of here. You know, as you can see, the finished castings are over on this side, but what's under this cardboard is just a feeding area, attempting to lure the worms out. We've already hauled out worms twice. On 2 occasions we hauled out worms, and what has happened so far was that we tried to do a breeder environment. So those 3 buckets were put right back into service after that first haul out of worms from that bus box over there. We put them in the 3 buckets back again, but this time there was a small number of worms mixed with a large amount of bedding. The whole idea there was that setting them up with an environment like that would spur on breeding. Here, this was launched only 10 days ago with the haul out, the second haul out of the worms from that bucket over there. There's been 2 haul outs already, so probably not too many left over there, but I know there are still some. But that second haul out launched off this bin here, and I think the estimates for how many worms are something about 1700 in here, and over there it's really, you know, like I said, a small number of worms into each bucket, an estimated couple hundred in each bucket. So here we've got an estimate somewhere under 1,000, somewhere in the 600-700 range. So they're both due for food. I want to check in there, and I want to check the feeding zone too, over in the horizontal migration feeding area, to see, I don't know, maybe put a couple more bits of food in here. And at some point I'd really like to see the final haul out of worms, and bring this whole system to an end, harvest those castings once and for all. So I'm going to get to work. Let's get them up on the bench and get started. So the motivation that we're attempting to use to get the worms to migrate out of their finished castings over to the collection area is sort of a combination of positive reinforcement, which says, hey, here's some nice brand new food over here in this fresh bedding where there's moisture with plastic, you know, trying to create a place, an environment that would attract them, while at the same time wanting to make an environment on this side that would sort of motivate them to want to leave. So a little bit of negative reinforcement happening here, and you can see the primary negative reinforcement here. I think hopefully I'm using the right expressions. Please correct me if I'm not. I am not a psychotherapist. I only play one here on my channel. So the material, as you can see, is starting to get a nice dry consistency. It flows, none of it clumps due to moisture, and that's because every time we come in here we give it a good stir to try to bring any moisture ridden damp stuff that's down low up to the surface, where it too can have a chance at drying off. And as this material dries, the more and more the material dries, the less and less the worms want to remain in it, because the moisture of the surrounding materials is key to the worm's ability to breathe. So it's no wonder that they're highly motivated to position themselves in material that's nice and damp. And it was during the last check-in 10 days ago, when we did that most recent haul out, when we noticed how the material was still kind of damp, but somehow to me it seemed like this mixing of the materials was going to help a lot that last time, because it did seem like the material that we were taking from the top surface that had been pretty dry was dry enough, I thought, to result in a combined moisture that would probably drive the last of the worms out. And I think that's probably what we're seeing here. I mean, I haven't seen a worm yet. Then again, I'm usually kind of combing through this stuff pretty quickly, and there's still that chance that I've, you know, just breezed right past one and missed it. But so far it is looking to me a lot like what we might have here is a batch of depopulated castings. I mean, is it right up to the Okay, I see one over here on the edge. I thought I saw another one. No, it's just a stick of some sort. All right, anytime I find something a little bit larger, I've just been tossing it over to the other side. You know, it does almost appear to me like we've completed this migration of worms out of this batch of castings, because I don't, well, there's another one. The one I saw earlier was a little bit chunkier, chubbier. Might have been this one over here. And I guess just the fact that I've encountered a couple, you know, I'm not prepared to do another haul out today. I really came down here with just some food to even feed this one if necessary, but it does seem like adding food to this might not be necessary. It might just be sufficient to come in here at some point and relocate the worms, but you know, I'm going to just allow a little bit more time just for those last couple worms that I might have missed that might still be on the edge there, or any ones that I did accidentally scrape away from the very edge and mix back into the material a little bit. I think a little bit more time, we'll just let this stuff go. And, you know, as long as we've come this far, we might as well take a look at how things are progressing over here in the migration area, right? As long as the moisture is still sufficient, we'll just let this continue a little while longer, and then these worms that have collected over here will be able to get relocated into a new home. I thought that perhaps if we did spot at least a few leftovers, then maybe we would skip giving them food today. You know, what the heck, it's right here. I can always toss in a couple pieces of something, whatever I've got here, and none of this stuff has been frozen. Most of my foods that I give to my worm bins have been frozen. These have not. So I've got a feeling that these will take a little bit longer to get to that point where the worms can begin taking advantage of it and nibbling on it. But that's fine. I think just by being surrounded by a whole bunch of nice damp castings like what they have here, I mean not castings, damp bedding material surrounding them, they should be quite content, because they could satisfy their hunger by just nibbling on the bedding materials too. Although I don't think I see anything that registers in my mind as leftovers from the previous feeding down in here. There are just, you know, nice little pockets of worms hanging out in certain places. Perhaps there was some sort of little bit of leftover food over around here where a good number of them are collecting. So why don't we just reinforce the food supply over on this side too a bit. It might seem excessive, might seem completely unnecessary, but like I said, I'm not really prepared to do another haul out today. I figured if I'm coming in here to feed, even if it doesn't need to be much, we'll just give them a little bit. And I think before we restore the coverings, maybe a little shot of moisture wouldn't hurt either, right? Because even though things do seem kind of nice down here, I don't really feel like the foods we just gave them are going to be bringing with them very much moisture. So I've got my squirt bottle here all set to go. I believe it might even have some pressure in it, so we can just apply water, maybe not. Lately, every time I go to use this thing, it has only a faint little bit of pressure, but you know, I think that this is just about enough too. I didn't really want to inundate this with too much moisture, but I wanted to give it a little bit of something, and this might actually end up being exactly what the doctor ordered here. So we're going to let this go a little bit. Most people are probably saying, geez Louise, take the worms out, give them a new home. But I think they're going to be fine in here for a little while longer. This way we're also going to give the last few worms that are still holdouts over in this stuff, even though there might not be many, we're going to give those little guys a chance to really finally exit this stuff over here, and then we'll harvest. You know, I think 350 might just be the number in my head in terms of how many more days to allow. Like I said earlier, 338 I believe is the age today, and if we go maybe another 12 days, that'll get us exactly to 350. And I think that'll pretty much guarantee for us that those castings are all completely depopulated and that all the worms remaining in the system are right down in here for us to scoop out all at once and set them up in a new home. So for now, we're done in here. Let's move on to the other two bins and actually give them a feeding too. All right, onward. So this was the one that had the multiple stickers from the breeding buckets applied to it, because I'm really just treating this one as the ongoing continuation of what started in the breeding buckets. But those were 3 systems that were launched with just some fresh bedding and a number of worms. Like I said, with the key objective of giving them a space where they would feel that they can grow their numbers and reproduce. So I don't know whether that worked or not. It would have been very difficult to see cocoons left behind in this material. This material is kind of like a perfect hiding ground for worm cocoons, but I guess sometimes it just doesn't hurt to sort of slow down, take your time, and see if you can spot any. I don't see any, but it would be nice to see some cocoons. But I guess I'm just going to continue on just sort of with that that belief that the breeder bins hopefully did their job by giving these worms the sense that they've got a lot of space to occupy, and that there's very few of them to do that, and that, you know, that would spur on mating activity within the system. Whether that worked or not, we will eventually see. If we see a huge explosion of baby worms. So let me think here. What was it? 6 days ago? 6 days ago we emptied the breeder buckets into here, and that was nothing more than emptying the contents into here. And while they were in the breeder buckets, they received a number of feedings, but not since they've been here in this box, which is going to be their kind of forever home, at least until it becomes filled with castings and it's time to harvest. So I like the way there's worms kind of scattered throughout the material everywhere. It tells us that no areas in the system have become dangerously dry or inhospitable for the worms. And there's some a little bit of casting material beginning to pile up after just over a month of them being, well, I guess the idea of them being in the breeder buckets for 28 days for 4 weeks was that that breeding impulse would begin fading within the adult worms once the cocoons that they started dropping into the environment were beginning to hatch and the baby worms were beginning to appear on the scene. So after 28 days, it was deemed to be a completed phase of their life cycle, that whole breeding exercise, and we just reunited all of them into here. Alright, so all I really did was I turned all that dry stuff that was out on the surface down into the bin, and I'm just a little bit concerned now that I might have overly dried the entire contents of the system by doing that. I don't know, as I continue to sort of probe through here while I'm opening up a nice little hole to drop today's feeding into, I'm feeling like the moisture seems okay. And granted, we are drying certain stuff a little bit by placing dry materials down into it alongside it, kind of sucking a little bit of the moisture out of the surrounding materials, but hopefully it won't be too harsh or drastic on the wormies. So this is a whole bunch of potato peel for most part, some vegetables from a soup, and let's try to be fair here. Let's leave enough for the next system too. And the next system is the one where we believe there might even be additional worms more than what's in here. So it did seem to me like we've got a nice population in here. It certainly doesn't seem lacking in any way. So before we cover up, I'm going to just grab my supply of crushed eggshell and give them a little bit of grit to go along with this feeding too. And I am thinking it might be nice to get a little bit more moisture in here, and you know, I saw a variety of little crawly insects, maybe mites of some sort, and it does seem to me like this mosquito dunks, the BTI solution, which is really geared towards, you know, it's marketed as a control for mosquitoes in your yard, but it also seems to work really nicely on gnats and fruit flies and stuff like that. So when I had a kind of an infestation recently of those sort of bugs in my worm bins, starting into the application of BTI into all my systems really did seem to help. I'm not being deliberately slow here, just at the little pump. Sometimes I'll put a little bit of cooking oil down into that pump just so it, you know, can rebound and reset more quickly, but until it does, I can't get that next squirt in, so a little bit tedious doing it this way. But I did want to maybe get a little bit of BTI in here since I was noticing some creepy crawlies, so we'll see what we could do about trying to help control that a little bit. So right on top of where the food was and the grit was added, we just piled on some nice damp bedding right over the top of it. And if I can get a few more squirts out of here, slow reset squirt handle, I think it can't hurt. You know, we'll be going back on once again with the plastic coverings the way we found it here. Originally when we ended here last time, I just used paper to cover things up, and I soaked that paper before I called it a day, but that stuff dried out pretty quickly, and I think it might have been the next day when I came back down here and put those 2 plastic bags over the top to be you know, something that's going to help prevent any moisture from escaping the system through evaporation. So I don't know, I think I've lost track. It's hard to keep track when the squirting happens so slowly, but I believe we've added sufficient amounts of moisture now to make sure that by submerging that dry stuff down into the bed, we're not creating sort of a dangerous or frightening environment for the worms down low. Just keeping things at a nice, cozy, damp level for them. You know, I don't remember how these were set up, but I had sort of the whole top surface covered, edge to edge. Often I'll just have the piece of paper sort of floating out here with the material around the edges of it visible or exposed. But here, these pieces of paper were actually in the 3 buckets where the worms got dumped out of when they were doing their breeder exercise or their breeder project. So those pieces of paper were already sort of belonging to the system, and I figured I'd bring it over. Later came these 2 bags, which seem to be doing a good job keeping the moisture down in here. So let's go get the other bin and get them fed too. So now, I guess I'll admit, to me it does seem a little counterintuitive to say that this system has so many more worms in it, because before I did mention how this one had something in the neighborhood of 16 or 1,700 worms estimated to be living in it. And that's an estimate combining not only my best guess at how many worms live here, but the viewers from their comments. You see all kinds of castings piling up down here. And I believe that's from the moisture that collects on the plastic that we just removed a moment ago. The worms are definitely coming up for that moisture. And while they're there, they're leaving behind their castings. There is a good bit of moisture in here, I must say. So this bin had been built and sat around for a very short period of time before I was able to move the worms in. So you could see the bedding that I used was really just a bunch of torn up leaf bag from outside, combined with the much more finely shredded prepared bedding, of which I've got more here on standby. I thought today would be a good idea to see if we can increase just the size of the space that these worms live in. Because you saw how much room the other bin had in it in terms of just bedding everywhere. Because that was the contents of those 3 buckets all getting just dropped in there. And during the first 28 days that those worms had to live together down in those buckets for the breeding, you know, only so much of it was converted into castings. A good deal of it was still remaining. Here, I had built up the system with a variety of different stuff. I'm just wondering if maybe we can drop the fresh material sort of in like an outer section, or, well, you know, if we do that, then we can start probing down and exploring and see how things look in here. And then at that same time, we'll be combining all the freshly added bedding right into the neighboring stuff. It's a new way of doing it, maybe. I've never done it this way before, but it just felt like I had an opportunity there to sort of see the outer perimeter, see how things looked. I guess what I saw right down the middle seemed pretty obviously nice and damp and full of castings getting left behind there. I see a cocoon right there. So This, I see another cocoon right there. This is clearly, you know, an environment that the worms are pretty comfortable in, from what it would look like. So hopefully I'm not mistaken. The moisture I don't think will get sucked down by this stuff. This stuff is stored damp, so it's already got its own moisture content to it. It shouldn't suck in any moisture. And then I guess what we could do is we'll just start heading towards the middle now to open up the feeding area for these little guys, and maybe in the process we'll get a chance to see the worms that have been busy creating these nice fresh castings scattered across the top. I'm also wondering if some of these castings might have just been the castings that came along with the worms, because when we did the haul out of the feeding area, whatever bedding was in that feeding area got hauled out with the worms and transported with the worms. So it might just be a little bit deceiving to think that all these castings were actually created here in the past 10 days or whenever it was that we launched this bin. Yeah, 10 days. 10 days old now. And it was not a bin that was set up with any food. It was just bedding materials. Leaves and cardboard and paper. Some larger shreds of hand-shredded paper near the bottom, covered with some finer machine-shredded shrapnel or confetti size bits. So here I feel like we've added a good bit of material around the outer edges, and you know what, on that same theme, why don't we just continue? We'll grab another nice generous handful to lay down right beneath the foods that they're getting. Now I think we've increased the overall size of their domain by a good amount. And if we don't even have to stop there, we can keep going. We can maybe even bring in some leaves. I think my stock of leaves in the box that I keep them in is pretty much reloaded and replenished. So why don't I go grab some of that too? Yeah, this should make them pretty happy. A whole bunch of nice fresh leaves across the top. Let's treat this feeding with a nice healthy portion of grit to go along with the feeding. And then we can start covering up. We'll give them some of these leaves. These leaves are going in dry. And we don't need too much. I just thought a little coating of that stuff on the top would be nice. Nice little bonus for the worms. Here's some more shredded materials, and now we can begin maybe covering up a little bit here. Start bringing in some of the worms and the surrounding materials back over to cover up with. So this should be this bin should be kicking up pretty nicely in a very short period of time, I believe, especially if we're already seeing some freshly deposited cocoons right there on the surface. That means these worms are comfortable and they've been busy establishing themselves, and they must be sensing that there is ample room in here to expand their population size. So I like the idea of giving them that feeling and continuing to if it's possible. So let's finalize this feeding with even more bedding. Okay, let's go. I like this sort of natural top covering. Gives the whole system this nice sort of earthy, natural appearance. And on can come the covering. So here's the newspaper that was draped out across the top. This thing was probably brand new. Yeah, it must have been brand new a week ago or 10 days ago when we launched this system. So it's no wonder it's holding up pretty good. But here I can already see spots where the worms have been nibbling through it. Any place that they come up and maybe there was a little pocket of moisture just sitting there on the paper. Maybe they, you know, went in there to sip up the moisture, but then they also at the same time took a little nibble off the paper too. That's the reason it's there, so more power to them. Alright everyone, looks like we're done now. Checking in on the transition and process of trying to get what's remaining out of there, and granted we probably could have actually finalized the whole process today, but I think a couple more days of letting that migration really wrap up will ensure for us that you know, batch of castings is free of any worms. And then that final haul out, we'll have to either decide to put them into one of these systems, maybe launch a new system. I'd like to hear some feedback on that. What do you guys think? I do have another bin that's been priming there off on the side, ready to be populated at any given time, so we can always even launch another system if it seems appropriate to do so. So that's it for today's video, everyone. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always very much appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks so much for watching. Bye now.